Okay, so episode 6, stepping forward with our vulnerabilities. Madiha, creator.
Daniel Malik. I am a creative director at Ogilvy.
And do you have any other way of introducing yourself as well? I'm sure.
I think, so I've done theater. I love doing theater. I haven't done it for a while. I am a poet. I write both for the brands I work on, jingles for them, and I write poetry when I'm not writing for them. That's purely for myself. And I was in a band as well. It was called Bagherat Brigade. I was the lyricist for the band. And that's about it, I think.
Thank you. So thank you for being here. Daniel and I have worked, I know him as DT.
Yeah.
Baptized him as such as well, I think,
You
a few
have.
years back. So we worked together for a brief, long time.
Yeah.
A brief in terms of duration, long in terms of its intensity. That's how it was. And I felt like when the topic of vulnerability came, DT's name came with it. And we were having this conversation before this began as to why. So I'll start with my perspective on vulnerability because it's a big word, it's a big concept. So I'll bring my perspective and I'd love for you to share yours.
Cool.
Thank you. So for me, vulnerability begins all the way from childhood. So what we know to be as the inner child. So the inner child is born with this huge innate sense of confidence, this innate sense of perfection. And because it has all this confidence, it feels like it can go forth and do anything that it wants to do. So the parameters of success that the inner child sets for itself are very different from the worldly concepts of success. And so the parameters of success that the inner child sets is, for example, am I brave enough? What exciting thing I'm going to be doing today? Where can I show up and bring my creative, fun, joyful self to which experience? And how that inner child has no concept of an audience or of the outside world. If he or she is messy, they're okay. If he or she is talking to plants when nobody else is, they're okay. They have their own magical gardens. They have their own fairy tales. They have their own versions of what the outside world looks like. And there's this great excitement about growing up, but there's a lot of innocence in that excitement of growing up. And as that inner child begins to grow up, they come into spaces where they don't feel safe. Now, the reason why they don't feel safe is because they're asked to be who they're not. So if the inner child is, loves to experiment in the outdoors, they're taught to sit in classrooms. They're taught to hold utensils, pencils, papers, and work only with them. That's their form of expression. If the inner child, for example, wants to learn about the world through, creating wood facts, artifacts, they do not have the liberty to do that because you write an essay about it or you make a drawing about it. So there are ways that the inner child is being inhibited in showing up as the true expressive selves. And what they're learning slowly is that whatever confidence that they had, whatever sense of bravery that they had in going forth and experiencing the world is slowly being curtailed, not dialed down, curtailed and defined within certain limits. And now the parameters of success for the inner child is changing. So the parameters of success would look like how brilliantly have you written an essay, how much you have contributed in solving a maths problem, how good you are with understanding concepts of geometry, and how good you are overall as a child, as a brother or a sister, or as a friend. So the inner child then begins to experience for the first time him or herself from the eyes of others. And he or she always finds himself or herself falling short because the eyes of others are, again, learned eyes. They're not authentic eyes. So you're constantly trying to be somebody that you're not, to fit into boxes or definitions that other people have set for you. And so what you're slowly learning is to be less brave. What you're also slowly learning to be is less courageous. You're learning to be safe. You're learning to go to school, make sure you show up on time, make sure that it's a uniform. Make sure that you have a healthy number of friends so that when your birthday parties happen, your entire existence depends on how many people showed up. You're learning how to be a good son or a daughter, of how farma bardar you are, how well trained you are, because otherwise it just reflects badly on your caregivers. So you're learning these outside alien concepts which are not true to who you are. And then the way that inner child starts to converse with him or herself. So the first thing is an inner conversation that begins, right? So the inner conversation is, I should be doing this differently. Or am I sure, second guessing. So am I sure I want to do it this way? Or am I good enough to be able to do it? Because look at that person, he's doing it so much better than me. Because there's very fixed ways that he's being measured or she's being measured, right?
I think, yeah. So what you're saying, and I think I've had first-hand experience of that all throughout my life. But I think it always starts off as fear. So when you see that you don't fit under a general definition of things set by society or set by others around you, and then you start fearing it. And then, so look at me, I was never the tallest guy in the room, I was never and not even the best looking guy, so I was just me all throughout. And I didn't care much, like you mentioned earlier, that when you're growing up you don't care too much about these things. But as I was growing up, these things and opinions of society, and I think a lot of other stuff, they started sort of putting that pressure on me to be like others if I can't be better than them. And so this became a fear. But I think the journey from fear to sort of being able to express yourself, or being able to just accept yourself, is the courage that takes you forward. And I think in my case, I was lucky enough, and I was also, I think it happened accidentally, that I found the right people to tell me that it's okay. And I think my grandfather was always one of those people. And I think there's a very interesting thing when I look back at it, that whenever I used to come back from school, he would be there at the dining table shouting, "Oh, mera sher aa gaya." So this really never really hit me until very late, when I realized, and when I was talking to my own son, that even this very little phrase, this sort of meant something, and this gave me that boost that I needed, maybe to go on through the day. And I think it's stuff like this that makes you go. So like I was saying, that my whole life has been a first-hand experience of this. So starting from this to being something in school, or sort of proving yourself in the school, and then going to a good college, going on a Fulbright, then sort of making a band and being on the stage, and then performing in front of thousands of people, and then sort of waiting for them to accept or reject what you've done. I think that sort of put me in a zone, that put me in a space to be okay with that kind of fear, because I think it's only coming to terms with that kind of fear that really moves you forward.
So it's interesting that you say that, you calling it fear. For me, these are, I was reading this quote somewhere, which is said, it said, it's not about you receiving love, it's about you removing the barriers that you've made against love. And when the removing of those barriers is what I feel the journey of vulnerability is. Because when you begin to show up in your relationships as who you actually, much before, let's start with the relationship with the self. For the longest time, for me, it was very difficult to look at myself in the mirror. Now, I would look at myself 1,000 times in the mirror, getting dressed up, but look at yourself in the mirror and hold your gaze. Because sometimes when I would do that, I would not recognize the woman or the girl who was staring back at me, because that girl was so defined and had molded herself so much to fit in, that the inner me, the inner child me, the braver, more carefree, the more experimental version of me was hiding in there somewhere. I could see her somewhere. So when the first step in removing that first layer of vulnerability is the conversations that we have with ourselves. And the reason I say mirror is because mirror is looking at yourself in the mirror is a very intimate moment. It's the most personal moment you would have because you're seeing yourself through your own eyes and you're seeing yourself. So in that moment, are we brave enough to have, bring all of ourselves in that reflection that you're seeing? And by all of ourselves, once you've lived a certain years on this earth, there's a lot of mess that gaze reminds you of. A lot of people that you've chosen to be who you were not, a lot of choices that you've made which bring the emotions of shame and guilt, a lot of ways that you've chosen to interact with your partners, with your friends, with your own children sometimes, in a way that you're ashamed of. So once you if you can hold that gaze in the mirror, looking at yourself and say, okay, so this is the mess that I am. This is the mess that I have lived. And through this mess, the only person in this moment, because abhi to sirf aap aur aap ho. So the only person that's judging me in this moment is me. Mm-hmm. So I am looking at myself through the eyes, which are borrowed eyes. They're not my eyes. So if I look at myself through the eyes of my inner child, they will tell me that if my clothes are the dirtiest because I was making a magical castle where phantom birds and phoenixes were going to come and lay their eggs, and dragons would as well, and my clothes have been really dirty, and I'm a complete mess. So I'm just giving you very like a simpler example of what messy would look like physically, literally messy. Yeah. It's okay because I am creating a fantasy that nobody else can see, but I'm so clear on why I'm doing it because I believe in the magic of this castle that I'm creating. And no matter how messy things have gotten for me right now, it's okay because I am creating something that is unique and real and special to me. And I don't need another person. So I would do that in the corner of my garden that nobody else would ever. It was a very private space where I would create these magic castles. मिट्टी के वहाँ पे किसी और ने आकर नहीं देखना था, किसी ने तालियां नहीं बजानी थी, बट वो मेरे लिए काफ़ी था. The fact that I am creating from a real authentic part of me with a belief that only I believe in, with a vision that only I see, and it's okay. So वो जो messiness नहीं थी, वो creation थी, वो discovery थी. But जब हम लोग बड़े हुए और उस messiness को हम लोगों ने translate किया in some decisions we've made, in some wrong turns or some unexpected turns we've taken, and we've labeled itself as wrong, messy behaviors that we will never, oh my God, so much shame and guilt attached to it. What happened? Like, why can that not be labeled as a process of creation and discovery? And why do we hold ourselves so critically small, where we just suddenly shrink ourselves and everything that we believe in into that one moment, or wo moment jo hai, because again, I was listening to another podcast the other day where, this woman really broke. It's like trauma is a big word, and we feel trauma is attached to these big incidences in your life. But when a child is, when a mother or somebody that the child is very close to say, you are stupid for doing that you are stupid, sometimes that child spends a lifetime trying to prove that he or she is not. Mm-hmm. So the reason why our conversations with ourselves change as we grow up is because we begin to pay heed to outside voices, and we begin to forget the vision and the magic that we are bringing in that moment that nobody else can see, but we see. We're there, we're creating it, and it's for nobody else but for us.
Firstly, I think if I get lost in listening to you, that's absolutely fine because I enjoy doing that on its own. But I think what you were saying and what you're saying, I think uske andar ek baat, I think it's an important realization when you understand that it's a process. You use the word process, and I think जब normally हम पहले अपने आप को देख रहे होते हैं तो हम अपनी ज़िंदगी को और लोगों से बचा रहे होते हैं, बट आई थिंक उसके अंदर कहीं ना कहीं वो और लोग भी हम खुद ही बन जाते हैं. सो हम शायद अपने आप को ही खुद ही आगे लेके जाने से कहीं ना कहीं रोक रहे होते हैं. आई थिंक दैट्स समथिंग दैट वी फील इज़ इम्पॉर्टेंट फॉर द सैंक्टिटी ऑफ of who we are or where we stand or what you've already accomplished. And I think that's something that stops us from going one step ahead and changing all of that. So like we were having this conversation earlier as well. I was trying to break down vulnerability for myself and for somebody who's a simple mind and who doesn't understand complex words. I think I thought of some कॉमन रेफरेंसेस. आई थिंक जब हम क्रिकेट खेल रहे होते हैं तो क्रिकेट के अंदर एक टर्म यूज होती है कि विकेट छोड़ के खेलना. सो विकेट छोड़ के खेलने का मतलब लिटरली ये होता है दैट यू आर एक्सपोजिंग द स्टंप्स टू द बॉलर एंड नाउ यू आर अलाउइंग हिम टू हिट इट, बट ऑल्सो यू आर ट्राइंग टू प्ले more freely, and that sort of gives you that liberty. You know how in bullfighting you're waving that red kapda and you're really calling the bull to come hit you, but you're not letting it hit you. And I think that's vulnerability for me, and it's absolutely fine. That's how things move forward, unless you allow pain, unless you allow new venues to come hit you in the face and then you take them as new challenges. You're never really going to go forward. Then you're just going to stay where you are, and that's the worst thing you can do to yourself. If you just, it's okay to be happy with yourself, but it's never okay to improve. And like we say, it's always a ongoing process. So that's life, I think. And I've gone through many phases in my life, and being very young and being appreciated for what I do, that all this stuff sort of hits you in the face and says that now you've become somebody and now you have to live up to it. And I think that's something जो आपको जिंदगी में बहुत सी और चीज़ें करने से रोकता है, क्योंकि आपको ये लग रहा होता है कि आप जो कर रहे हैं वो भी कुछ बहुत बड़ा है और अब वो ही you have to live up to it. But I think just sort of pushing yourself back and allowing yourself the room to play, वो विकेट छोड़ना ज़रूरी है.
I think room to play and room to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And room to not have to show up as a person who knows things just because. So now we're moving to vulnerability in workspaces or in our professional life. I think it's पता नहीं कब हम लोगों को ये सिखाया गया और हमने सीख लिया बड़े आराम से कि to be able to be respected, you have to be the person in the room who knows the most. Doesn't ask questions, he always has the answers. तो हम लोगों ने सवाल पूछने भूल गए हैं हम लोग, और सवाल पूछने तो बड़ी देर की बात है. द फैक्ट हम लोग ये बताना भूल गए हैं कि आई डोंट नो. So for a person in power who has, for example, at a director level, and they have a certain amount of years of experience behind them, for that person to say when, for example, in a boardroom or for a position, so for a problem to a solution, or at a forum, it's like मुझे नहीं पता, I don't know, tell me. That is the first step towards vulnerability, because what you're really saying to the people in that room is, I am I may have more experience than you, I may have a lot more knowledge of a different kind, but in this space I don't know, and I'm not pretending to be the person who this designation tells me I should be. So I feel like in professional spaces especially, the need to be the person who knows the most in the room, or the need to be the loudest, or need to be the most aggressive, comes from hiding the vulnerable side of us. And the vulnerable side of us will always be the fact that we don't know everything. We don't know a lot to begin with. Forget everything. We don't know a lot. There's been a beautiful dance of skill and fortune that has brought you here, and you're still learning. You're still trying to be a better person. There are 5,000 things in your life which are not working. This boardroom space with your designation is working. To overcompensate for the 5,000 other things which are not working, I don't have to show up as a person who just is in control. So to be able to bring your vulnerable self to professional spaces, or when you come to work, would mean ki here I am. I'm going to start the day the best I can. I'm going to make maybe 10,000 mistakes. I'd love for you to support me. Even if you do, I'll learn to be a little kinder to myself at the end of the day, saying, okay, I made those 10,000 mistakes, or I learned 10,000 different ways, and tomorrow I'll try again. लेकिन ये जो vulnerability का ये आसान है क्या ना, अभी मैं तुमसे बात कर रही थी कि in my workspace, like just today, I had a trigger moment with a person in another department, and that trigger moment, I've been priding myself on my healing journey, saying that I'm showing up as a particular person, and a big part of me being on the podcast is I'm showing up as myself. I'm not pandering to an audience, so I don't care how many people are tuning in. I'm going to show up and speak my truth. तो मुझे क्योंकि सारी जिंदगी मैंने ऑडियंस के सामने प्ले किया, ऑल्सो थिएटर बैकग्राउंड, मुझे भी कर्टन कॉल का हमेशा इंतजार है कि अब कौन सी मैंने प्रेजेंटेशन किया, लोग उठ के स्टैंडिंग ओवेशन देंगे, तालियां, मेडल्स भी मिल जाएंगे, कान पे जीत लिया, सब बहुत 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 भी आप बड़ी मानी जानी इंसान है. तो लेकिन अब मैं ऑडियंस को देखती नहीं हूँ, अब तो मैं अपने लिए शो अप करें. चलो जी, आज ही उस बंदे के साथ ट्रिगर हुआ और मुझे, एंड आई आस्क्ड माय सेल्फ, आई सेड व्हाई इज दिस पर्सन ट्रिगरिंग यू, व्हाट इन दैट पर्सन इज रिमाइंडिंग यू ऑफ व्हाट यू ऑलरेडी हैव दैट यू डोंट लाइक. And what I realized was this person is pandering to an audience. I've done that my whole life, and the part of me that's still doing it might not be happening in the podcast, but it's definitely happening in other parts of my life. So in that moment, after that, not in that moment, but I gave myself 10-15 minutes of processing that particular emotion. जहाँ पे मैंने अपना को गिल्ट शेम भी किया कि बढ़िया, आपकी हीलिंग जर्नी अभी तक तो ये हम लोगों ने इसके ऊपर काम कर लिया था, फिर आप ऑडियंस के ऊपर, फिर आपने ट्रिगर के ऊपर भी रिस्पॉन्ड किया, रिएक्ट नहीं किया, रिस्पॉन्ड नहीं किया, रिएक्ट किया. तो ऑल जो हमने सारे वो, but after those 15 minutes, what I decided was, what I've also been learning is to be kinder to myself. Is to tell myself that I'm a human being and there were 15 times that I will falter. Even at the end of, like, if I've worked on something consistently, आखिर में मैं हाल में अगर मेरा 50वीं साल में अभी रहती हूँ, in my 85th year, I may still be pandering to an audience, but have I learned to be, my parameter, the KPI that I'm setting for myself is, have I learned to be kinder to myself when I find myself still pandering to an audience?
I think being kinder to yourself also sort of, it needs to be spelled out maybe, because मुझे ये लगता है कि जब हम बात करते हैं कि to be kind to yourself, हमें शायद ये लग रहा होता है कि ओ अच्छा बस कहा सुना माफ किया, और no, but sometimes being kind to you is also asking yourself the right questions, maybe figuring out that you weren't maybe right, and that's also being kind to you yourself in a long run. Because I think जो अभी हम पहले बात कर रहे थे, sometimes I feel the best relationships I've had at workplace, be it with internal team members or with clients, I think all of them have been where I have not posed to be someone else, when I've just been myself, and I've told them that it's okay that I'm making mistakes, it's okay if I'm sitting down on the floor, I'm lying on the floor, I'm just thinking, and maybe I'm unable to think, and telling your partner or telling your team member that you're not able to crack something is also fine.
It's beautiful,
and I think that's something जो शायद हम, जैसे आप कह रही थी कि हम घबरा जाते हैं, बट मुझे ये लगता है कि based on my personal experience, जो शायद अच्छे clients के साथ भी, and I think this can apply to any industry, but especially in advertising, you can't move forward unless you have that relationship with the client to really do what you want to do. And I think it's important for them to see through you, because sometimes by allowing that, you're also allowing them to show their true self to you, which generally I feel
so
is
which
I feel on their side is often the is the biggest barrier, like you mentioned earlier. क्योंकि अगर आप बहुत ज़्यादा post कर रहे हैं, you are pretending to be the person with most information in the room, they also have to put up a show.
बिल्कुल.
And sometimes that's the worst position to be in. Then they are going, when you put something in front of them to judge, they're really going to make sure they judge.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a cycle of enablement that you're starting.
Yeah.
But I love this. You're right. When every time you decide to show up as your vulnerable self, whether it's at home or at work, people have responded with corresponding vulnerability. So, and it always happens, and I think it happens. The biggest impact that you see it coming to life is in your personal relationships, at home. So your the closest relationships you would have, and I want to talk about each of them separately. I know you're a father as well.
Yeah.
So I think the toughest place to be vulnerable is as a parent in front of your child, because for multiple reasons. The first one being, you are held at a pedestal from the child's end. You believe as a parent you have more rights over your child than the child has over themselves. Okay. So, from that sense of I have more rights over that child, you are now playing a role. And the role that you're playing is of a parent. A parent का role कैसे define हुआ है? जिसने boundary set करनी है, जिसने उसको तमीज़ सिखानी है, उसको ज़िंदगी में survive करने का तरीका सिखाना है. Otherwise, इसको तो बेच के खा जाएंगे लोग. So you have to show them how to survive in this bad world, but you will show it in the way that you know. Now, if the way we know, the only way we know, because that's the way we were shown, is through discipline, through dant dapat, through shaming, through corner time, through timeouts, as opposed to conversation saying कि भाई, as a parent, मेरे पास कोई handbook नहीं आई थी, मुझे कुछ नहीं पता है कि मैं यहाँ पे क्या कर रहा हूँ या क्या कर रही हूँ. I don't know how to handle. So, for example, and I'm going to share this. My son, he's a teenager. When he and I shifted to Malaysia, we went through, and it was lockdown. We went through a terrifying time together because he and I always have been at odds with each other. We're two very different people. It's been very difficult for me as a single parent to navigate that line between being a friend and being a parent. So it's always been a blurry line. And I thank God for that, because that means I've never actually adhered to one rule. But what it also ended up translating in as that he was doing things, and I don't want to, because he's a different human being and he has his, I'm going to protect his privacy. He was doing things that were not okay in any space, right? So, the funny part is he was only doing things that I had done when I was a child, and I knew exactly what not to do. So first of all, I knew that I had to understand the motivation behind him doing that. We've grown up with, and he's seen both of us living from one paycheck to the other. To the fact कि जब महीने का 25 बल्कि 22 तारीख होती थी तो उसके बाद हमारी ग्रोसरीज कैप होना शुरू हो जाती थी, एक्सपेंसेस कैप होना शुरू हो जाते थे. So when he, for example, would step out and take money from my wallet, I've done the same to my parents. And I know that it's not the action. Where it comes from is this fear of not having enough, that I'll have to save up in case मुझे कोई चीज़ की ज़रूरत पड़ी तो मेरी अम्मा के पास, मेरे अब्बा के पास पैसे नहीं होंगे. So I used to do that, and I was punished for it. I was punished for it badly. But I was such a pro at it that I did it continuously. So it did not stop me. It shamed me. It tagged me into being one kind of a child. And that sense of not having enough translated into every other aspect of my life, whether it was my personal life, whether it was the choices that I made in my partners, in my marriages, whatever it was, it translated, I don't have enough. अभी मैं मुट्ठी में बंद करके पकड़ के चोरी करके साइड पे होकर बैठ जाऊँ. So I recognize the motivation behind that. So how I changed my strategy was, first of all, I told him, I said, I've done the same thing. I've done it many, many times, so I know what you're doing and I know why you're doing it. So can we please, अच्छा, अब in an ideal movie, उसमें इसका पूरा game changer हो जाता नहीं. तीसरी दफ़ा, चौथी दफ़ा, आठवीं दफ़ा हुआ, 10वीं दफ़ा हुआ और बड़े बड़े points के ऊपर हुआ. तो जब 10वीं दफ़ा हुआ ना, the only thing that was consistent, DT, for me is every time it would happen the same thing. I would say, Asad, why have you done this? This is the first time you're doing it. So I would deliberately delete all the other 8 or 9 times that he'd done it, so that he does not carry the baggage of those. I approach it every time as if it was the first time that he was doing it. So how it worked out for him was, I was not looking at him through the eyes of a person who does a thing. It was not a habit. I refused to acknowledge it as a habit. I refused to tag him as a person who has this habit every time. And the 11th time, it didn't happen. The 12th time, there was no 11th or 12th or 13th time. Because when I did not see him as a certain kind of person who had a habit, now whatever that habit may be, he did not see it as that habit. And he also understood that my mother, and the reason I knew how to do that was because I was tagged as a person and I've lived like that for half of my life, right? I was a kleptomaniac at some point in my life, in my school years. शॉपिंग के ऊपर भी पोनियाँ पहनने, चीज़ें जो मुझे नहीं चाहिए थी वो मैं उठा लेती थी. तो he did not have to carry it, and he did not carry it beyond a year, because I chose for him not to be looked at like that. So my vulnerability was telling him that I'm a human being. I forget the mother part of it. I'm a human being who's done exactly this, and I see you. I see the why behind what you're doing because I see my own why. And that we have a beautiful relationship now. And there was a lot of other decisions that I made as a parent which were very detrimental to us, to our relationship. One of them believing, because I was treated that way, कि 2-3 थप्पड़ मारो ठीक हो जाएगा. तो वो जो 2-3 थप्पड़ मैंने उसको मारे हैं, उसके चौथे और मैंने मारे हैं एज अ 15-year-old boy, उसने रिटेलिएट नहीं किया. मैं भी रिटेलिएट नहीं करती थी. उसने रिटेलिएट नहीं किया. बट अगली दफ़ा जब मेरा हाथ उठना और उसने मेरा हाथ पकड़ा, and this just happened last year, and he said, Mama, what are you doing? This is not you. Where are you? Why are you doing it? So the same principle that I applied to him, I said, Asad, you don't have to take money from my wallet. Why are you doing it? He asked me the same question. Why are you doing this? This is just a behavior. I refuse to look at you as a person who has this behavior. Why are you doing this? That's when I realized that I'm just playing up a reel that I have, because that's the only way that I feel that I can control. I have to control my child. जैसे उसका अपनी तो कोई किस्मत है ही नहीं, उसका अपना तो कोई खुदा है ही नहीं, उसकी अपनी तो कोई चॉइसेस है ही नहीं, उसके अपने तो कोई राइट्स है ही नहीं, बस मैंने ही उसको कंट्रोल करना है. पहली बात. और दूसरा, द वे टू कंट्रोल इज थ्रू फिजिकल कंट्रोल.
I think, Joe, so while I was listening to you, I think it's something about human behavior, I think also, that we're very secretive in nature, and we like to keep our secrets to ourselves, because they're not only exposing everything that happened, but also exposing us in a way. And I think
Isn't that vulnerability?
Vulnerability is exactly this, that when you open up about a secret, then there is no going back. Then
What a beautiful way of putting it. Can you repeat it, just because it sounds so good and I want to be able to absorb it?
I think the way you put it, I think this thing about secrets, that when you open up, there's no way of going back to them. And so you sort of spoke about it, and now you yourself can't go back to doing it, because now it's your truth.
It's out
now.
in the open.
It's out in the open now. And so this is a constant reminder, and I think this is what vulnerability does to you. And I was thinking of, while you were talking about it, I was thinking of instances that I've had with my son, and he's very young.
How old is he?
4 now. So, but he's a lockdown kid. So like major years of his growing up, early years, he has been in a lockdown, but that also meant that he was just at home with me. And I think so everything he was learning from me. And this also put a lot of pressure on me. And I was just trying to. So I think that's, once again, I was in the zone where I had to be my best self to show him. But I think they're never learning what you're showing them. They learn showing them intentionally. They're learning everything that you're showing unintentionally. And he would, मैं देखता था कि जैसे मैं लेटा हुआ हूँ, वैसे ही टांग पे टांग रख के लेटा हुआ है. जैसे मैं अगर कुछ गलत कर रहा हूँ, if I'm leaving the bathroom door open while I'm washing my hands, he would leave the bathroom door open. And मतलब छोटी छोटी चीजें, छोटे मैं जूते कैसे उतार के कहाँ रख रहा हूँ, वो वैसे ही जूते उतार के वैसे रखेगा. But I think I decided this along the way, that I can't be pretending to be somebody else in front of my own kid. And that's when I was okay with it. That okay, I fall. It's okay that I make mistakes. It's okay that I sometimes am not perfect. I forget things. So जिस तरह जब मैं अगर कुछ गलत करता था, तो my wife would shout, दानियाल क्या कर रहे हो? और नायल, my son, उसने नया बोलना शुरू किया, तो वो भी कहता था, दानियाल क्या कर रहे हो? So I allowed him that kind of margin, and this was my way of being open and transparent in front of my own son, for him to learn that it's okay to make mistakes even.
So what's the vulnerable part of yourself as a human being that you bring to your relationship with your son as a parent?
I think I'm the most unorganized person. I think I'm not the best of sorted and organized people. And I think also the fact that when he grows up, he's going to have people tell him what his father looks like.
What do you mean looks like?
Generally, I think you go to these schools and people are they're all dressed up to pick their kids, and it's a discussion for the kids and the teachers how the parents look like. And so I think all of this, I'm training him for this world, and be very normal with it, be okay to it with it, because I think generally he's going to answer these questions for himself one day.
What questions though? Like for example, what are the questions that you'd like for him to answer differently?
I think generally, अच्छा, so हमारे अब्बा का कद छोटा है, सही है. This is, I know this is something very simple, but I know that this can really be torturous for him if somebody says this to him one day, and or maybe something like this, ke, but your father is not in a very, it's a serious profession, even that he's in the entertainment business, or he's in an advertising business. So all of these things, I just want him to be very comfortable. There are videos of me online that he's going to grow up and watch, but he watches them now and he loves them. So I think that's something that's not sort of bad in a way, but that how people sort of, how society sort of throws that at a kid is something, the way I think. And also I have my own vices. Like I'm not the best of human beings, but I think it's this vulnerability that I'm trying to sort of, that's allowing me to fix things at my end as well. I think it's क्योंकि मैं चीज़ों से छुपाना नहीं चाहता, तो शायद मैं इसलिए चीज़ें ठीक करना चाहता हूँ.
और ये वैसी चीज़ें हैं जो तुमने सारी जिंदगी छुपाई हैं?
शायद अपने आप से छुपाई हैं.
What would those things be?
I think generally how do I put it? Can you ask a more direct question? Ask it.
What are the things that you don't like about yourself, that you've hidden about yourself from other people, that you're okay with bringing to your relationship with your son?
I think I'm very competitive, but sometimes even in a very negative way. So I think that's something very toxic that was very toxic about me. I'm already trying to work on this, because I can go to any length when it comes to competition. And I think that's also something that I didn't choose for myself, but I figured out that it's in me and I have to. And maybe it was just the way my family was, and I was always very competitive with my sister. So it was always literally, हम बचपन में खेलते थे, तो वो अगर हम दो रोल्स करें, मतलब like she's a better footballer, then she would say मैं तुमसे 2 उंगलियां ज़्यादा strong footballer हूँ. So that was the amount of competition that I had growing up. And I think generally in life, when you're fighting bigger challenges, I think you just get in the rut of not thinking it through and just being more competitive. And I think other than that, I feel I'm very impulsive. I feel I think it's a good thing also. So there's the part of it that's good, and that I want to keep that part. Without losing that part, I want to let go of the emotional disasters I create around me when I'm not able to sort of figure out a solution, and then I just start throwing tantrums and start blaming others for things. Then I feel, like I mentioned, I feel I want to be more organized, just to an extent that I'm not thinking about the consequences. And
I think the other part of vulnerability from this point is, one is you and your child, and the other one is you, your spouse, and your child. So that brings us to the third part of vulnerability, is how how comfortable we are in bringing our vulnerable selves to our intimate relationships. So for a child, the way their first interaction with a relationship, an intimate relationship, is the relationship between his or her parents. and the dynamics of that relationship, how those two individuals interacting with each other. And because that child is, I imagine that child as a pair of eyes which are always there, whether you know it or not. So you think that some things are happening behind closed doors. You feel like just because they're asking questions, they don't understand. You feel like sometimes you shut them up and that's the end of that conversation or the end of that experience. But the child is absorbing dynamics of that relationship. And when, so that does that, so for me, what it means or how it translates as is, how okay are you with having a conversation with your child about your relationship with your spouse? And not as a grown up, because it is an inner child still, your child younger at a younger age. So I know I made the mistake of assuming just because a child is, so that's the tragedy. When the child is acting older than his or her years, we बहुत प्यार से कहते हैं he's an old soul. He's acting, no, my friend, he's had to grow up beyond his years because he's not had a chance to be a child. And so I've made that mistake of burdening my son with the problems that I've had in my marriage, thinking that he is my friend. But that's because I was not ready to bring my vulnerable self to that home. I ended up making him an accomplice into hiding the fact that I'm not okay. So it was never it was never an honest conversation. It was never a conversation which translated into, Asad, this is not how what a marriage looks like.
Yeah.
This is not what love looks like. This is not what a healthy relationship. That conversation was never that. It was mostly like, all lies. I'm okay. Don't worry. Just because we've had this fight does not mean that you're loved less. You're so important to me. Crap, yeah. Like, when you're having a major blowout with your partner, the child is the least of your priorities. You're not looking at the children. You're just so involved in having that. So to what extent are you comfortable with bringing because it's the most challenging relationship?
I think, yeah. So I think there are two parts to this question. I think it's just the relationship I have had with my spouse. And I think it's interesting to know that I was in a relationship with my wife for 13 years before we got married. So 13 long years before marriage, and now it's been 6 years of marriage. So that's almost a lifetime. So I think, frankly, when we got married, it was nothing like we were expecting. क्योंकि जब आप इतने साल एक रिलेशनशिप में रहने के बाद उसी इंसान से शादी कर लेते हो, तो आपकी शायद एक्सपेक्टेशंस बिल्कुल कहीं और होती हैं. And then you want to just have the whole person to yourself because you've waited for so long. But I think जब वो हुआ, and I was newly sort of starting to get noticed at work, and this is what I wanted to do. She's always known me for being a very creative person. She has always known me to be somebody who would wake up all night just to work on a script, or be up all night just thinking, right? So जब शादी हो गई और उसके बाद वो expectations का एक इतना बड़ा पहाड़ आया, तो मैंने बहुत अरसा वो पहाड़ छुपाने की कोशिश की. I pretended to be a very, very nice man, not able to handle the situation. And so it only got things worse. It only made things worse because I wasn't facing the problems. I was just trying to shove them under the bed, say कि अच्छा बस सही हो जाएगा पर अभी नहीं हो रहा. So I'm trying to work on this. But then I think almost 1 year, one and a half year into the marriage, I had a real conversation with my wife, and we talked, and I told her just these plain simple words, that this is not the person you married, the person you want me to become, and so I will not let you change me for something that you've never loved, into something that you've never loved. मतलब ऐसा कुछ मुझे नहीं बनाओ जो बाद में तुम्हें नहीं पसंद आएगा. So she realized that. Obviously, it was a big compromise or big understanding on her end to accept all of this, because एकदम से उस time वो भी शायद she wasn't ready for all of this. But I think it was this first honest conversation that led to a much more real relationship. क्योंकि उससे पहले शायद वो, and I think that's mostly the point जहाँ पे it's either this road or that road. Because यहाँ तो हो जाता तो ये हो गया है, नहीं हुआ होता तो वहीं ख़त्म हो जाता. But I think she stayed she stayed with me, and I think she chose to stay with me. तो मुझे लगता है कि उसके बाद चीज़ें होना शुरू हो गई. And then when Nile came in our lives, I think it was once again a major reinforcement of how much we love each other. And so this is a proof of that. So I think
So you chose to be vulnerable at a critical point in your life,
yeah,
right?
and I think उसके बाद से फिर अभी we both have our roles. So I've told her that I can't be a very traditional parent. I can at best I can be his best friend, because that's how I deal with people I love, and that's the only way I know. मैं उसका वो वाला बाप नहीं बनूंगा जो मुझे बनना ही नहीं आता, और तुम उसकी वो वाली माँ बन सकती हो. So maybe we change roles. And I think this was also a big it was a big difficult decision for two parents to literally switch roles. She's the alpha. He knows कि अम्मा ने जब ना कह दिया तो इसका मतलब है कि ना, और बाप ने ना कह दिया तो उसकी हिम्मत कैसे हुई. So this is how this entire thing.
So it just goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's interesting that there's a man and a woman sitting here having a conversation about vulnerability, because what it means, what this word means for a man is so much more different than what it means to a woman. It comes naturally to a woman, but she's not okay with doing it because she doesn't feel safe. She doesn't feel protected. So if I were to share my perspective on vulnerability for a man, and I'll take from your story, and that's why I'll start with you first, which is एक बंदे को सिखाया जाता है तो एक तो ये कि सारी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी तुम्हारे ऊपर है, अल्फा मेल आप हो. आपने जो है किसी को अपना दुख दर्द नहीं सिखाना, स्टोन कोल्ड हो जाओ, माउंटेन की तरह खड़े हो जाओ, खामोश होकर, आंसू आपने बहाना नहीं है, खामोश होकर जो है आपने अपनी सारी जिम्मेदारियों का, there's a lot of pressure in men being those upholders of responsibility and roles across the family, right? And for that man, so what does it mean to be vulnerable for a man? I think the simplest breakdown of that is कि आप बैठ के कहो कि मुझसे नहीं हो रहा, मुझसे नहीं हो रहा. और ये आपको पता है, and I've seen that in my closest family relationships, men take this to the grave, but they would not say it. Because that is, in their view, and it's such a tragedy, in their view, failure as a man. And yet when you say nahi ho raha, there's an entire universe that steps up to support you in what you want to do, like your wife did, in such a beautiful way. And so what it means to be vulnerable to a man, for a man, is ke wo kahe, start a conversation, mujhse nahi ho raha. So not be that stone cold.
Yeah, I think
role
you put it beautifully. Yes, because I think thinking back now, and I think this is the first time I'm thinking about it like this, that she could have just not agreed to do it, and she did. And that's why it's still a very beautiful relationship, because it works like this, and it's okay to change roles at times.
Absolutely.
It's okay to just be yourself.
And I think the opposite of vulnerability, I believe the opposite of vulnerability is pretense. You're just pretending to be, whether you realize it or not, you're pretending to be all these people and playing all these roles seamlessly without a hitch, which are expected of you, without giving yourself space or having a safe place to break down and say, "Mujhse nahi ho raha." So from a male perspective, from a woman's perspective, I think it's a little bit more different. It's a little bit different, because being vulnerable for a woman, and I'm saying it from my point of view, is asking yourself to step into an unsafe space. And it goes right down to the basic core of safety. It's not even an emotional space. It's a physically unsafe space. So what it means for a woman to be vulnerable is, for example, because a woman loves bigly in neon lights with all her heart, in a way that a man loves differently, a woman loves differently. So when a woman is vulnerable with her heart, that means that she is exposed. That's what I feel. That means that my vulnerability is a raw new baby born skin being put under the glaring light of the sun and it'll burn anytime. There's so much fear attached with showing up with all your heart. And so it becomes so much more vulnerable. It's so much more difficult to be vulnerable. It's easier said than done. And I'm just very, like maybe 2 weeks old, learning to be vulnerable as a woman, because I have been more comfortable playing the alpha male role my whole life, and bringing all of my heart to the table in whatever I do, in exactly the way it is the hardest thing I've had to do. And DT, I'm still waiting for it to be snatched away, for it to be trampled on. And I don't mean love in relationships only. I'm waiting for it sometimes, like, I'm just waiting for it to go wrong because I feel exposed. Like there's nothing to hide behind. मेरे पास कोई wardrobe नहीं है जिसके पीछे मैं छुप के एक रोल अदा कर सकूं. मेरे पास कोई costume नहीं है अभी. मेरे पास कोई borrowed dialogues नहीं है. मेरे पास कोई script नहीं है. I'm speaking right now exactly here. Like I have nothing. I don't have a PPT to drive my thought process. Don't have a Word document. It's just me. And अभी मेरा इस वक्त I'm in my flight mode. मेरा सांस उखड़ा है. I'm not being able to breathe deeply because I don't know. I think that's why it was so important for me to have this conversation. I don't know how to be fully vulnerable because there are always these, मतलब मैंने अपने ऊपर अभी भी 6-7 protective layers चढ़ा के रखी हुई, shields लगाई हुई हैं.
I think I was actually visualizing when you were saying this, but I think the thing with vulnerability is कि हमें लगता है कि अच्छा, जिसे कहते हैं दूध का जला छाछ भी फूक फूक के पीता है. सो हम जिंदगी में एक दफ़ा मार खाते हैं और फिर हमें ये लगता है कि अच्छा आइंदा कुछ भी हो जाए दोबारा मार नहीं खानी. And I think that's what sort of trains our brain not to do something. But maybe this is the way to do things.
Yeah, like help me change the perspective. Tell me, I feel like there's something here for me. I feel like there's a message here for me. How do you change that perspective?
I think so what you mentioned as the protection or protective layers or filters or whatever, I think they never come in one go. I think they come all throughout our lives. हमें जब एक तरह से मार पिटती है, जब एक तरह से डांट पिटती है, तो हम कहते हैं कि अच्छा अब इस तरह से दोबारा फेल नहीं होना. And I think that's how we sort of train our minds to not be vulnerable in that particular aspect ever again. And I think इस वजह से हम अपने आप को हमेशा we start building that fort, we start building that wall around us, and nobody can enter that again.
तो नीचे कैसे हैं?
So मुझे ये लगता है कि this is the process. मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि ये हम इसको ऐसे क्यों देखते हैं कि यार अच्छा ज़िंदगी में बस आगे जाना है. ये आगे जाने का रास्ता, ये तरीका नहीं है कि आगे जाने के लिए है बस जो गलत हुआ वो दोबारा नहीं हो सकता. क्योंकि I think generally, and I think you're a great creative yourself, but I think creativity is all about being sensitive. And I think you have to be sensitive every single time. You can't say that I was sensitive that one time and that didn't pay off, so I'm not going to be sensitive.
So
again.
DT, you know what? So creatives have this great defense. I feel like that's the most validated wall there ever was. I embrace my vulnerability. Look at the way I write. Look at the poetry that I write. Look at the pieces of work that I create. Look at the films that I make. I embrace my vulnerability. BS. We use pen and paper to show a version of ourselves which are controlled and still has an audience in mind. We are not showing up as our vulnerable selves. And I feel like even when I was talking to you, the only way, the opposite of okay, so you've been in a situation जहाँ पे आपको एक तरफ से मार पिटी है, आपने उस सिचुएशन में दोबारा नहीं जाना, उसका रिजल्ट क्या हुआ? आप स्टैग्नेंट हो गए, आप एक जगह खड़े हो गए.
ऐसे ही.
अच्छा, अब एक जगह खड़े हो गए हो तो आप एक्सपीरियंसेस नहीं अब कर रहे हो बिकॉज आपको अब डर लग गया है, उस किस्म के एक्सपीरियंसेस आप दोबारा नहीं करोगे. सो यू एक्चुअली नॉट अलाउइंग योर सेल्फ टू एक्सपीरियंस द सेम मोमेंट डिफरेंटली एनीवे, राइट? अब आप खड़े हो गए हो, अब खड़े होके आपके पास एक्सपीरियंसेस चल के आ रहे हैं, आपने उनको नो किया, एक दीवार दूसरा नोक किया, दूसरा दीवार, तीसरा दीवार, आपकी स्टैग्नेंसी में वो दीवारें बन रही हैं, आपकी स्टैग्नेंसी में वो दीवारें बन रही हैं. सो द ओनली वे to break down the walls is to step out and experience it again and experience it again and experience it again. I don't mean blindly, I don't mean foolishly, but experience it. I feel like from a very personal front, I feel like I stagnated when I was 20 as a person who stopped expressing her full, amazing, glorious, beautiful self because I was shut down 3 times. और उस 3 times मैंने कहा एक दफ़ा तो नहीं किया था, 2 दफ़ा नहीं, 3 दफ़ा बाकायदा किया था. तो अब मैं यहीं पे खड़ी हो जाती हूँ. I felt like I stopped. And I stopped really, I chose the safest experiences.
मुझे ये लग रहा है, and the way when you're talking about it, मुझे सिर्फ ये लग रहा है कि हम शायद थोड़ा सा ना घबरा जाते हैं क्योंकि हम vulnerability को actual pain से replace कर देते हैं. So
दोबारा बोलो.
मुझे ये लगता है कि हम घबरा इसलिए जाते हैं क्योंकि हम वनरेबिलिटी को एक्चुअल पेन से रिप्लेस कर देते हैं. एंड सो वी स्टार्ट, जो आप कह रही है ना, स्टेपिंग आउट ऑफ दोस वॉल्स, हमें ये लगता है कि अच्छा, इफ वी विल बी वनरेबल वंस अगेन, दैट विल एक्चुअली मीन द सेम पेन अगेन. सो इस वजह से हम दोबारा वनरेबल नहीं होते. एंड आई थिंक मैं जिस तरह, आई डोंट नो हाउ एल्स टू पुट इट, बट आई थिंक इट्स ट्रस्ट द प्रोसेस. मुझे ये लगता है कि इट्स दिस कि आपको अगर नहाना है तो आपको पानी में जाना है. आप ये नहीं कह सकते कि मैं पानी में जाए बगैर मैं नहा लूंगा.
नहीं जी, हमारे पास है ड्राई शैम्पू.
No, but I think I hope I'm able to explain this.
Yes,
I wrote something and I thought I'll share it here if the time comes. But I think it's also once again talking about the same thing, and I'll just read it in a minute. But मुझे ये लगता है कि हम हमेशा कोई एक्सटर्नल एक्सक्यूज ढूंढ रहे होते हैं उस चीज़ के लिए जो हमारे लिए काम नहीं करी. And if I can, I'll just read it very quickly.
Don't have to be quick. This is not a TVC that needs to be aired or a DVC that has a 15-second edit. It's long form. You can go on and on for as long as you like. Instead of part 1 and part 2, I can do part 3 edit also. No problem.
Okay. So it goes like this. So just for people who don't know this, but I think everybody knows this, but normally जब हम छोटे होते थे तो पलक का बाल जब आता था गाल पे तो हम उससे दुआ मांगते थे. मतलब I think it's I don't know if it's religious even, but
actually
just
it's quite universal. It's make a wish.
It's make a wish, right? So कभी गाल पे टूटे पलक के बाल से मांगी दुआ. अब सोचता हूँ क्या सोचता होगा खुदा. न जाने क्यों गालें उसी ज़रा से बाल की राह अब भी तकती हैं. न जाने क्यों नहीं मिलता, न जाने क्यों मैं खो बैठा, कि उसके बिन दुआ पे शक सा होता है, खुदा पे शक सा होता है. मगर फिर खुद पे हंसता हूँ, खुदा क्या बाल देखेगा, खुदा तो हाल देखेगा, दुआ बदलेगी जब मैं खुद अपना हाल बदलूंगा.
So beautiful. Thank you.
So I think generally we're just always trying to find an excuse for not being vulnerable, and we feel that that's the thing messing up our lives. Okay.
What I got from this, I want to share it, is what you said also, but what I really strongly what resonated for me was the sense of faith that we have when we make that wish on an eyelash. It is so complete, and there is no way anything else is possible because आपको एक eyelash मिली और आपने उसके ऊपर एक wish की, तो अब तो ये होगा ना. It's so simple. So I think somewhere along the way, we forget that purity of belief because we've learned to be so afraid of all the times when we have not received what we have wanted. But I would like to reframe that a little bit, is that we also did not ask for it with the same faith that we once had.
Because I think it's always the fear. The fear sort of puts us in that block to not cross that line again. because you might get hurt again.
Yeah.
And I'll read another thing.
Please do.
So I will read this one, and I think it's. So I wrote this one particularly during the COVID. So me, my wife, my son, all three of us got COVID, and we were isolating separately, and it really felt. It was the first wave, so it really felt that life is coming to an end. And then I went back and started thinking about every single time I felt like this, that the life is just about to end.
Wow.
And so I picked those insights, those instances, and this is what I wrote. हमारा इतना सा दिल बंद हुआ पड़ा है, जैसे दिल के सर पे पहाड़ आ गिरा है, क्योंकि इस बार जो हो रहा है शायद ये पिछली हर बार से कुछ ज़्यादा बड़ा है. पिछली बार, पहली बार बचपन में कज़न के घर खेलने के लिए ले गए थे खिलौना, भूल आए वही. बचपन में कज़न के घर खेलने के लिए ले गए खिलौना, भूल आए वही. वो खेल रहा होगा उससे, सोच सोच के आया था रोना. जब छूटा था बीच बाजार में अम्मी का हाथ, और गुजर गए थे कुछ सेकंड, तब नया नया पता चला था क्या होता है दिल का बंद होना. जिस कमरे में जाने से लगता था डर, जाना पड़ा वहीं, खाली था पूरा घर, और अचानक चली गई थी मनहूस लाइट. आंसू भी उस दिन निकले थे अपनी जगह बदल कर. जब दोस्तों के सामने हीरो बन के पूल में पहली बार छलांग लगाई थी, जिस्म का लाल होना अलग, पहली के बाद दूसरी सांस नहीं आई थी. जैसे तैसे चढ़ तो गए थे अलमारी के ऊपर, पर उतरना कैसे है समझ ना आई थी. बुक क्रिकेट के जुनून में सख्त सड़ियल टीचर वाली बुक रह गई थी घर, या जब हो गया था प्रूव हमने ही बहन की चॉकलेट चुराई थी. गाड़ी चलाना सीखते हुए ब्रेक की जगह दब गई थी जब रेस, जब हमारे फ़ोन पे लड़की की कॉल अब्बू ने उठाई थी. आंखों में जब नींद की जगह आंसू थे, रात 3 बजे फ़ोन से इट्स ओवर की आवाज़ आई थी. जब हमने दुआओं में खुदा से तकरीबन कर ली थी लड़ाई, मगर हॉस्पिटल से घर उस जान से ज़्यादा प्यारे की लाश कफन में आई थी. शायद उम्र के हिसाब से उतना ही सख्त था हर बार इम्तिहान, पर हमारा इतना से दिल ने बंद हो के चलने की कसम खाई थी. इस लम्हे जो हुआ है बंद, ये ढीठ इस सब से भी निकल जाएगा, जैसे गुजरा हर इम्तिहान ये वक्त भी गुजर जाएगा. So I think generally in life we've been through all these challenges that felt extremely dangerous or painful at that time. उस वक्त जब अलमारी के ऊपर चढ़ गए थे और नहीं उतरना आ रहा था, तो लग रहा था कि अच्छा अब सब खत्म है. And we didn't want to talk to anybody about it, but we still managed. And I think that's the courage. And we were talking about this, but it's actually courage.
It is.
You were asking me, how do we step out? It's the courage to
take that chance one more time.
Take that chance one more time.
One more
yeah,
time. One
that's
more time.
it.
So, yeah.
I think that's it.
Okay. So, thank you for being here. इस सबक का मफहूम जो मुझे समझ में आया है, वो ये समझ में आया है कि रुकना नहीं, चलते जाना है. And चलते जाने हैं with a sense of वही faith जो एक 6 से 7 साल के जो बच्चे का है कि कुछ नहीं होगा, कुछ नहीं होगा, अगला एक और कदम बढ़ा लो, एक और कदम, कुछ भी नहीं होगा. So maybe a little bit of that faith and a lot of courage in our heart, we keep moving with all the trailing, broken, messy parts of us, and learn to take that chance one more time and one more time and one more time. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.